He could barely walk, but trembling, he entered a weapons store and asked to buy a handgun. Seeing the frail old man in front of him, the store owner thought he wanted the gun for self-defense and immediately recommended a Glock. To his surprise, the old man even asked him to write down a user guide for the handgun because he had Alzheimer's disease. Following the customer-first principle, the store owner helped him write down the operating steps. After purchasing the weapon, he shakily loaded the handgun and then took a taxi to his first target's home. No one knew that the elderly man in front of them had a handgun hidden in his bag. He knocked on the door and asked if Rudy Kurlander lived here. Seeing the old man had come to see her father, the woman invited him in without any suspicion and said her father was downstairs watching TV. And so, Zev shakily walked down to the basement to find Rudy. Seeing the man laughing heartily, Zev asked if he was Rudy. After receiving a positive answer, he forcefully demanded Rudy turn off the TV. As Rudy confusedly turned off the TV, Zev shakily took a handgun from his bag and threatened him to stand by the window. This sudden turn of events left Rudy in disbelief. He had no recollection of the crime this man was accusing him of. But faced with the threat of a gun, he had no choice but to obediently move to the window. With his already deteriorated body, Zev even needed a flashlight to see Rudy's face clearly. Looking at his face, Zev repeatedly asked if he was a German officer and what position he had held in the military. These questions made Rudy realize Zev's intent and identity, and he asked Zev if he was Jewish. Zev admitted to being Jewish and asked if Rudy had ever been to the Auschwitz concentration camp. During the war, Zev's family was sent to the concentration camp because of their Jewish identity. His entire family was killed by the German officers' blades, and only he survived because the war ended. Meanwhile, the officer who was responsible for his family's death had disguised himself as a Jew to escape post-war retribution and fled to America, assuming the name Rudy Kurlander. After hearing Zev's story and understanding his purpose, Rudy calmly stated that he had never been to Auschwitz. Although he had participated in World War II, he had never been to a concentration camp. Upon seeing the old photograph Zev had brought, he stopped doubting Rudy's words. Soon, Max from the nursing home received a call from Zev, saying that the Rudy in question was not the real camp commander. 6 months ago, the lonely elderly Max had met the new Zev and his wife. During their conversation, they discovered they were both victims of the concentration camps, and their shared experience created a unique bond. Since Max was physically disabled, they agreed that after Zev's wife passed away, Zev, in better health, would take them both to seek revenge. But the unfortunate thing was that Zev's Alzheimer's disease had worsened over time, and he often woke up without any memory of the previous day. One day, Zev woke up looking for his wife, only to be told by the caregiver the heartbreaking news. His wife had passed away a week ago. The news hit Zev like a hammer, and he had forgotten so much. Yet the memory of his dear friend Max remained strong. After his wife's funeral, Max gradually became his brain, giving him instructions on what to do. After the funeral, Max sent everyone away and handed Zev a letter. Inside were some money, a train ticket, and the target and action guide for Zev's mission. After reading the letter, Zev resolutely left the nursing home and took a taxi on the road to revenge. But this journey for the elderly man with memory loss was full of thorns. After just a short nap, he completely forgot why he was on the train. It wasn't until a boy sitting across from him reminded him to read the letter that he recalled his mission from it. To prevent the memory loss from happening again, he wrote a reminder on his wrist to check the letter. After getting off the car, the taxi that Max had arranged earlier was already waiting by the roadside. Max had already made all the arrangements for this trip, and all Zev had to do was read the letter and execute the plan. On the other hand, his son Charles, after learning that he was missing, was desperately searching for him. But Max had already paid for this trip, and the police couldn't trace Zev through his real name. This was because 4 Germans named Rudy Kurlander had come to the United States during that time. Zev had to go door to door to find the real camp commander. After leaving the first Rudy's house, he quickly headed for the second Rudy's address. After several car transfers, he finally arrived in the city where his target lived. At the border checkpoint, Zev remained calm the entire time and didn't show any signs of hiding a weapon. Even while searching for his documents in his handbag, right in front of the security officer, his prolonged search caught the officer's attention. But luckily, Zev promptly pulled out his documents and passed the inspection without incident. Back in the car, he carefully placed the handgun that was hidden under the seat back into his bag. The second Rudy lived in a nursing home, and with the help of the front desk, Zev successfully found his room. But there were 2 patients in the room, and to find Rudy, he had to ask both of them. After Rudy raised his hand to signal, Zev shakily pulled open the curtain between the beds, then sat by the window and asked the other man questions. Upon learning that the man was indeed German and had been to Auschwitz, Zev slowly stood up and aimed his handgun at him, but the man's raised arm made Zev freeze in place. The numbers on his arm meant he was also a victim of the concentration camp. When Zev realized that Rudy had suffered the same horrors as he had, he couldn't help but cry on Rudy's body. He had mistaken a fellow victim for his enemy from those days, and this made him feel deeply guilty and regretful. After leaving the room, Zev's mind remained immersed in the sorrow of what had just happened. The memories of the trauma he had endured never faded with time, but instead became sharper and sharper. But Zev still resolutely walked the path of revenge, and when faced with another checkpoint, he skillfully hid his handgun. Soon he arrived at the third Rudy's house, but after knocking for a long time, no one answered. To find the real Rudy, Zev could only sit and wait outside the door, until a car finally stopped in front after a whole day. A police officer got out of the car and asked Zev why he was there. When Zev explained he was looking for Rudy Kurlander, the police officer said his father had passed away not long ago. This news left Zev deeply disappointed, but luckily the officer, mistaking Zev for his father's friend, invited him inside to rest. To find out if the officer was the real camp commander, Zev gladly accepted the officer's invitation. But when the officer opened the door to reveal his barking hunting dog, Zev couldn't help but step back in fear. Fortunately, the officer quickly pulled the dog away and locked it in the next room. After his father's death, the officer had been living alone here, having had little interaction with anyone for a long time. Zev's arrival greatly excited him, and he eagerly poured out his personal story to Zev. When talking about his father's experience, he led Zev to the bedroom to show him some Nazi items his father had left behind. There were not only flags from the Night of Broken Glass, but even his father's military uniform from when he fought in the war. He displayed these items with fervor, clearly thinking of Zev as his father's friend. The items and the officer's words made Zev feel uncomfortable. After realizing the officer was the former camp commander, but knowing he couldn't take revenge, Zev wanted to leave this uncomfortable place. When the officer saw Zev sweating, he kindly helped him take off his jacket and asked him to share his experience of meeting his father. When Zev mentioned meeting his father at Auschwitz, the officer was surprised and said his father had only been a cook in the army. In fact, Rudy had been only 10 years old when the war started, which clearly meant the real camp commander was not him. Realizing he had been searching for the wrong person, Zev stood up, preparing to leave, but the officer stopped him and eagerly asked about those years. As the two of them struggled, the officer suddenly glanced at the number tattooed on Zev's arm. At this moment, he realized something was wrong. Clearly, only the Jews from back then would have this sequence of numbers. The drastic change in identity made the police officer feel immense anger and disgust, and he screamed at Zev in a breakdown. Facing the chaotic scene, Zev kept apologizing to the police officer, wanting to leave this place, but the officer shoved him onto the sofa, and even the dog in the next room started barking madly. Countless sounds flooded into Zev's mind in an instant, continuously squeezing his sanity, almost suffocating him. Fortunately, the officer suddenly turned around to scold the dog, trying to quiet it down. At that moment, Zev involuntarily glanced at the handbag beside him. The officer, seeing Zev stand up behind him while he was reprimanding the dog, angrily released the hunting dog from his grip. This sudden accident left Zev somewhat confused. He didn't know what to do next. Looking at his clothes, now stained with urine from the chaos, he went to the bathroom and kept washing himself. Then, exhausted both physically and mentally, Zev lay down on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up the next day, he had once again lost his memory and started searching for his wife. Seeing the police officer's body outside and the dirty clothes in the bathtub, he was panicked, but he had no memory of what had happened. It wasn't until he rushed to the sofa and saw his letter that he remembered everything that had occurred. He then called Max, telling him that he had killed someone. Mistaking it for killing his enemy, Max excitedly urged him to turn himself in according to plan. But it turned out the one who had died wasn't the camp commander, but a Nazi fanatic. Although they had no fear of death, this incident left Max somewhat at a loss. He hesitated and asked Zev if he was still willing to continue the revenge, to which Zev firmly replied that he would finish what he started. He then changed into clean clothes and got back into the car, heading toward the last target. After a long and intense bumpy ride, Zev gradually fell asleep, leaning against the seat. When he woke up again, his memory was once again a blank slate. He followed the flow of people and got off the car, starting to search for his wife. Unexpectedly, he tripped and fell right into the middle of the street, but luckily, a passerby rushed him to the hospital. When Zev was admitted to the hospital, Charles received a call from the hospital. He couldn't figure out how his father ended up all the way in Nevada alone. On the other side, after Zev woke up, he received a call from his son, still groggily asking him to come along with his mother. After hanging up the phone, he began talking to a little girl in the ward, and mentioned that if she wanted candy, there were some in his clothes. However, the girl searched all his pockets but only found a letter, which Zev felt very unfamiliar with. He begged the girl to help him read the letter, and as he listened to the content, he slowly began to remember the journey he had been on. After retrieving his memory, Zev didn't notify anyone. He left the hospital alone and took a taxi to the final destination. When he arrived at the designated hotel, Zev hurriedly called Max to report his itinerary. However, due to the hospital stay, Zev didn't have enough cash to pay for the room. He had to use his credit card to pay the bill, and that's when Charles found out his father's destination. As his son rushed toward the location, Zev had already arrived at the last Rudy's doorstep. After ringing the doorbell, Zev urgently asked if Rudy lived there, only to learn that he was still asleep. Zev had no choice but to say he had something important to discuss, and wanted to wait until he woke up. His anxious demeanor made the woman somewhat suspicious, but seeing the elderly Zev, she still invited him inside. While waiting, the woman asked if Zev had come because of Auschwitz, saying that the experience there was so painful that her father never talked about it. Zev, however, scoffed at this, stating that the so-called pain had never truly come to this butcher. As the woman went upstairs to wake her father, Zev found himself sitting at the piano, playing. He had no memory of learning the piano, nor did he know the sheet music for this song, but it felt as if he were playing from muscle memory. Inside, he was filled with emotion as he played the piece, and it awakened Rudy Kurlander, who was slowly coming downstairs.
My daughter said, someone I knew from Auschwitz was here, but a survivor should not like Wagner, no?
You can't hate music.
The composer of this piece was none other than Wagner, the spiritual idol of the Nazi officers back then. Through this piece of music, Zev was convinced he had found the camp commander, their enemy from the concentration camp. But strangely, the man's attitude toward him was very friendly, as if he had known him for a long time. He took Zev to the garden outside, pouring out his pain of having forgotten his true self due to the years of disguise. The constant need to wear a mask made it impossible for him to breathe. Only in this garden, and in front of Zev, could he take it off. Even more strangely, Rudy seemed to consider Zev a longtime close friend. But this familiar attitude did nothing to extinguish Zev's thirst for revenge. When Rudy stepped forward to hug Zev, Zev sharply exposed everything, calling him by his real name, Otto Wallisch. He angrily accused the man of being the one who had ruthlessly murdered his family in the concentration camp. The name and the accusation left Rudy confused. He couldn't understand why Zev was accusing him. Zev ignored Rudy's defense and turned to take the handgun out of his bag. At the same time, Charles had found the location and said he was here to find his father. When he learned that Zev had Alzheimer's and had been missing for a week, the woman hurriedly led him to the backyard. But when she opened the door, she was shocked to find Zev holding a gun aimed at Rudy. He completely ignored Charles' pleas and demanded Rudy tell the truth, but Rudy refused to speak, even going as far as saying that Zev was crazy for making such accusations. This enraged Zev, and he turned the gun on Rudy's granddaughter. He told Rudy to choose between his granddaughter and the truth. If Rudy didn't speak in 3 seconds, he would kill the girl. Faced with Zev's threat, Rudy could only admit he was indeed the camp commander of Auschwitz. After killing many Jews, he fled to the US under the name Rudy Kurlander to escape post-war justice. This brutal truth stunned his family and caused Rudy immense pain. Then Zev demanded Rudy tell him his real name, but Rudy responded with the name Kunibert Sturm. Upon hearing this name, Zev immediately denied it and said his real name was Wallisch.
You are Otto Wallisch. I am Kunibert Sturm. We were both block Führers.
No, I know. I was a prisoner.
Look at your arm. You're number 98814. I'm 98813. We tattooed each other.
The two had never met before, but at that moment, Rudy clearly mentioned the code on his arm. This horrific and twisted truth was more than Zev could bear, and the belief that had fueled his quest for revenge shattered in an instant.
How could you forget? You took the name Zev because it means wolf. You said we were wolves.
After killing Rudy, Zev was on the brink of collapse, and in the silence that followed, he seemed to remember something. In the end, he chose to end his life with a gunshot. At the nursing home, everyone watched the news about the tragic incident, unable to understand why Zev had done such a thing. But Max slowly revealed the truth from behind. It was they who had killed his family. When Max met Zev, he immediately recognized him. He used Zev's Alzheimer's to perform deep hypnosis, convincing him that he was a victim, sending him on a revenge mission. This revenge-driven scam, wrapped in hatred and manipulation, ultimately ended in bloodshed. Max spent 6 months hypnotizing Zev, making the guilty party destroy each other to complete the revenge. And the suffering they had endured would not disappear with the death of the perpetrators. It would only grow sharper with time.